Okay. So everyone should be muted, other than Kiki, Lori, Nancy, and I. I'm not going to do any introductions here. I think most of you, if not all of you, already know Nancy Tucker, Lori Stevens, Kiki Yablon. Kiki, did I just say your last name wrong? Because I probably did. Yablon?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Okay. Can you say your last name so I get an idea?
I'm not sure.
That's
Start.
Yeah.
great. I know.
I say Yablon, but
I say
it's like
Yablon.
it's a butchered like Polish name, so who knows how it's supposed to be pronounced.
Well, I
know.
say Yablon, so that must mean it's right. So
You say Yablon.
yeah, well, I look, pronunciation of stuff is not my thing. So we'll leave it at that. Yeah, right. I know.
Oh, I
I
like that, yeah.
I can give my Latin version of it. And then myself, Eduardo, and we can start off with taking an idea of topics, or we can just start talking. Either are options. So everyone can type into chat. And if there's anything you'd like us to start talking about to begin with, we'll go from there.
There, I typed the first message.
Look at that.
With a Texan accent too.
Yeah.
Hi, y'all.
It's not very well known that Seattle has a slight draw. You know.
Oh no, she's from Texas.
Yeah, well, fair enough.
Fair enough.
These are things I did not know, Lori.
Oh.
I feel like now I know.
Ruthie, where's your face?
I gotta say special hi to Heather, Pumpkin's mom.
Yeah, Maria's here and Jennifer. Oh, Pumpkin's mom. How about that? Cool.
Well, if no one has a question to start, did we want to start with just talking a bit about behavioral consulting? And hi, by the way, yes, hi to everybody. And I think it's fair enough to stipulate we have 3 professional dog trainers in the room, and then myself, who is the academician, who is not a dog trainer themselves. Although obviously I do some training, but so I don't know where you all wanted to start with this.
Well, you go ahead, Nancy.
No, I was just I was laughing because I think that the topic might have been my idea, and
Yes.
I'm just sitting here drawing.
That was a prompt for you, Nancy, when I was like, I don't know where you all / Nancy.
And I actually don't remember what about it we wanted to discuss. If it was moving from training to beginning to take behavior cases, or if we were talking about specifically what is involved in a behavior consultation. And I don't remember. I know that we had a chat about this, but I don't.
Yeah, so I can.
Did we have a chat?
I can prompt it a little bit more because you were talking a little bit about taking data with behavioral consults. So you were interested, at least at some level, about the use of data, and we can talk about what that means quantitatively, qualitatively. But just
Eddie, you are going straight to your own topic. Don't
he really
think
is.
I don't
He snuck
see
that
that
in there. Yeah.
No, wait.
No.
Hey,
I'm beginning to remember.
Right.
Well, I think what I was proposing was that we go to the complete other extreme. And I think that I may have broached the subject thinking about how we can tend to complicate things for our clients because we start to talk about data and we start to talk about the more minute details of behavior change, and we tend to talk about that to the client and sometimes overwhelm them. I think that's how the topic started, how we brought up the topic. And a lot of trainers and behavior consultants, I think, are all over the place on the spectrum of how much information to share with the client, how much to involve them in. Well, of course, we need to involve them, but involve them in the data collection and breaking down our analysis and how we want to move forward with the case. So that
And then
Yeah.
there's even just the very beginning of it, right? Somebody calls us and says, you know, I'm having this issue, and this issue is a behavior issue. And so how do we even start that conversation? What data do we collect? Do, you know, we ask them to fill out a form straight away that might scare them? Or do we just do a lot of listening at first with some very pointed questions, and then before we see them for the first time, deliver something like a fade form and get more details about what their behavior issues are, so that we have a better chance of helping them. So there is all that like whole spectrum, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
depending on how complicated the behavior is the dog afraid of the ice maker, for example, which I've seen
Random
twice.
example.
Just a random example.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Ruth was there because it was Ruth's consult and I was out with her. Ruth, do you remember that? I see her picture. Maybe she went
The
away.
clunking sound of
Yeah.
the ice maker in the fridge.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah,
that makes sense. That's
Yeah.
rational fear. Yeah.
It was a long
So-
time ago.
Funny. I thought you were referring to the videos I've been posting of this.
I
dog.
was.
Oh, you were. Okay.
Yeah.
But you have an ice maker case too, huh?
No, I don't, but Ruth did.
Okay.
And I was with her
And you
a
were
long
there.
time ago. And Ruth is here on this call, but just her picture's there.
Oh, I see.
Well, what do you guys do in terms of your initial contact?
I
do you
don't
have a
take too much
form?
information on the initial contact. I most of the time I rarely take phone calls anymore, just because there's so much garbage that comes through the phone that it's a big waste of time for me to actually answer the phone. So most people contact me through my website or through email or through social media. And I usually ask for a synopsis of it, and we set up a time to chat about it to get more details. And in the beginning, I used to take all of the details on the first contact and spend a good amount of time trying to get to the heart of the case before we'd even agreed to work together, which was a mistake, I think, from a business sense.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think what happens when somebody initially contacts us with a behavior issue is that they don't really know what language to use when describing behavior to us. So those first conversations are about unpacking labels and, you know, really trying to get what happens before this behavior, what happens during the behavior, what happens as a consequence of the behavior. And, you know, it's just really clear communication, right? And we need to be able to fish out or tease out what is really the issue they want us to help them with. And sometimes that turns into, when you start unpacking it, it turns into there's 5 different behavior issues.
Yeah.
And so then we have to prioritize.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
That's
Kiki.
very true.
Well, I mean, an initial contact is, I'm like Nancy, my phone number just, I took my phone number off my website last year because I really prefer to get email. It helps me keep track of everything. And the initial contact is pretty short, but I might ask some questions, especially right now, because I feel like I'm not seeing clients in person much.
Mhm.
And so there are a few types of things that I don't feel, I wouldn't say types of things, but there have been some cases where I just thought, due to the combination of factors, that doesn't seem like something I can be successful with without doing in-person stuff. But there haven't been that many of them. But if I do ask some follow-up questions before I offer services, then they usually are pretty much like, what behavior are we talking about? What does the dog do? When does he do it? what's the outcome? You know, what do you do, or what happens as a result of that behavior? So pretty much ABC, and I don't get into a lot of the, I don't get into what does your dog eat, or things like that until maybe, I mean, I don't give advice on nutrition, but I don't get into a lot of things that I used to think were an important part of taking a history,
Yeah.
unless they start to seem relevant. So, but yeah, the ABCs.
Yeah. And
So-
sometimes that turns into multiple ABCs, right?
Yeah, but I do feel like I've been able to refine the questions I ask to get better answers. And then if I get lazy and I don't do it, I always get the kind of answers that aren't helpful. Like you know, I think I asked somebody today actually what they had already tried. And what I got were a lot of protocols or skills that they worked on, such as loose leash walking, that don't tell me anything about what the dog does, what the behavior looks like, or what circumstances it occurs in. So, you know, slap on my wrist. You always have to go back to that.
Yeah, so Kiki, you just mentioned something there about the kinds of questions you're asking. And this was just to kind of, I want to refine something here too, which is, and that's part of the topic, as Nancy, as you brought it up before, and you were talking about just now too, where and when is data useful, and what kind of data? What do we even mean by data? So there's philosophical questions involved there, but you mentioned this part that I'm really interested in the pragmatics, the practicality of this as an applied scientist, as somebody who wants people to take data, but I want to do it in a way that's only useful and not aversive to everyone involved. So if it's aversive, which people have an aversion just to the term in and of itself, and you mentioned this, so even asking questions, we're talking about data at some level, and you were talking about changing the kinds of questions you ask. So what do you find to be more, less useful, the kinds of questions you all are asking, and how do you deal with that? Like how are you recording that information? We don't even need to use the word data if it's in any way sounds way too weird.
Yeah. Well, I do ask people to fill out a questionnaire once we have an appointment set. And it might be longer than it might be longer than some people would advise, but I communicate with my clients in writing a lot. I mean, even before the pandemic. And so if people really dislike exchanging information that way, it may be that, I'm not the best fit. I find it to be kind of a good screening tool for people that I end up having the same communication style as. And I don't know, maybe I should be adjusting my communication style to serve more people, but that's where I'm at. So.
I mean, I think we have to have a baseline, or we don't know if anything's working. So,
right.
Data is what gives us that, right?
Yeah.
A baseline, and then whether we're progressing.
And the questions, I think, have to be about when they have to, the language that I find most successful to ask about antecedents is under what circumstances does this behavior happen? Yeah. When I think of what circumstances, I'm thinking of both antecedents and consequences, but I think when you ask people what circumstances does the behavior happen in, they are thinking about the antecedent environment. And then my questions about consequences tend to be, what happens next, or what do you do? Or even sometimes, why do you think the dog is doing it, which gets some weird answers, but that are inside the dog, but sometimes gets at the information that I want about what changes in the environment as a result of the behavior, or that might be perceived as a result of the behavior.
I like to ask those questions too. I like to suss out their take on it. because I usually get a lot of information about the family dynamics, about a lot of other aspects about that dog's life just by asking those types of questions and asking them their opinion, because it tells me a lot too where they are in their understanding of their dog's behavior, and that's usually when some of the information about what they've tried in the past kind of comes out. And it's an art to try to direct a conversation like that. I don't have a form that they fill out. When I was doing local consultations, it was all in French because I live in a French speaking community. And then I had kind of switched everything over to English, and I was dealing more with an international clientele. And then COVID hit, and things had to be moved around again. But I haven't had a great big long form in a very long time. And I use our initial consultation as a conversation to try to just to listen to them and try to get as much information as I can from that initial conversation. And then I start to recap based on what they told me. I start to recap using words that are useful to me and to see if they agree with my recap. And then that's kind of how I gather information. So I think it's probably not very scientific. It's probably not very well organized, but it's become a bit of a rhythm that I've gotten into that works for me. And I'm not sure that it would work under all circumstances, but because I did it so often, I guess it just kind of became a system that worked for me.
Well, my background before I was a dog trainer, I was, I know you were in a communications field too before, because I listened to, which podcast was it? Anyway, I got your history in a podcast at some point. But I was like a newspaper and magazine editor before this. And I'm always kind of reminded of like when the internet became a thing and when email became a thing, journalists started to send their questions by email to their subjects. And they would just send like a list of questions and they would get the list of answers and then they would write their story and turn it in. And that's bad. That's a bad way to do journalism. The best way to get information is really to listen. I'm sure you guys have all heard this on the radio too. You hear like an interviewer going down a script with somebody and they say something and you're like, wait, follow up on that. And they just go on to the next question on their list. And I think, I like the form because it saves me time and it does get at information that I want, but open-ended conversations are also really important and will reveal things that your script will miss. So
I think in the early days, those conversations used to get away from me though. They, I didn't know how to direct it or how to interrupt it. And we could go down all kinds of rabbit holes that would take forever. So I think that was a skill I needed to learn in this context, because I was able to do it in my old job, in my old life. I was able to direct conversations, but somehow in consultations, it would just get away from me easily.
Yeah.
That is such a good point, because people will talk for a very long time about how their dog was in a shelter or, how their dog behaved for the first, 10 years they had the dog. It can be very, very long. Go ahead. Sorry.
My bad. I'm bad at jump rope. I think though that also gives you data on the owner's behavior, like what factors are, in their learning history might be affecting their behaviors. Like if you hear somebody talking about their dog not being an alpha or whatever, like that might lead you to ask a question like, oh, well, have you ever done something? Have you ever been advised to, hold your dog down when they're, and it kind of gives you, it's all information. And I think part of our job is to sort it out, but we also have to know how to kind of direct things
totally
back to where we want them. If we want to.
I like the form and then discussing the form with them, because then I can get more information than they were willing to write. But I want them to think about the questions I ask on a form before, we get to that point of discussing the behaviors in more detail.
So I have a question for you guys, and for anyone who's listening who uses forms. How do you feel as a consumer when you're asked to fill out a form? Because I hate it. I usually just put 3-word answers because, I just, I want to talk to the person.
Nancy,
Really,
Maybe that's why I
I'm
don't give a form. Yeah.
a person who, like, I'm delighted when I can email the company to request a quote or
Yeah.
something, and then I get really irritated when they call me back from the email. So I guess I like forms.
It
Okay.
depends for me. It really depends on the form and what's being asked. If I'm getting ready to go do, let's just say, rehab with my dog, then there's certain things I want them to know before we do rehab, for example.
Yeah.
And so some forms I find are really useful, and some I'm like, oh, I don't want to fill out this form. Just let me have a conversation.
Or even
I'm gonna
a
bring this-
conversation by
oh.
email would work. Sorry, Kiki. Even a conversation
Yeah.
by email would work. But the forms, the filling out questions and having to, maybe it's a control issue. I feel like having to word my answers according to their questions. It's like, no, this is not what I want to talk about. Which, of course, the information is relevant to the person asking it. But sometimes I'm not aware of that, of why do you need to know this?
Yeah.
That's just me, though. Maybe
No,
I'm just
it's good.
impatient.
No, it's good. There's room for all different styles. And, I think some of the things that we're not talking about that come up often in behavior cases are things like, well, I hold my dog up by the leash until they can't move, and that stops the behavior. There's things we hear during that interview process that maybe aren't techniques we would use, or definitely aren't techniques we would use, and how we handle those during the conversation is also important, so that we can help that person learn a different way of potentially getting more of the behavior they want versus what they're doing now, right?
Yeah. Eddie, you will know more about this than I do, I think, but there is kind of a similar discussion happening in behavior analysis with humans in terms of assessment styles.
Right.
There are different sort of camps that are do sort of a more traditional, I guess, like an analog functional analysis. And there are people who are proponents of doing open-ended interviews and sort of combinations of assessment techniques. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so behavior analysis itself is a little it's a little odd in one very broad sense. In the field of applied behavior analysis, the emphasis is still always on data and quantitative data. So when we're talking about data, this is also, I think, sometimes a misconception, because I've talked to other trainers too, where they say, well, I take a lot of data, but it may not be data in the sense of being numbers.
Repeated measures.
Right. And so, and this is not to say that that's not useful information, but it doesn't adhere to some of the operational definitions within behavior analysis. But within behavior analysis itself, when we talk about trying to identify function at the applied behavior and analytic level, of course, you have the Awadian formal functional analysis, but then you also have functional assessments and descriptive analyses or assessments. So functional assessments are still quantitative. They're supposed to be. I know there are people, particularly within the animal training community, who have talked about using functional assessments, but they're just not experimentally controlled, but they still rely on quantitative data. That's the way a functional assessment, at least according to the operational definition that applied behavior analysis is used, describes it. And then there's a descriptive assessment, which is far more qualitative. Now, all of the, those three things are descriptive analysis or assessment. So it's more appropriate to describe, if we're just talking about ABCs, which even that talking about behavior, the way we talk about behavior differs, and even the way that I talk about behavior might differ from the way a trainer talks about behavior, but certainly the way I and trainers talk about behavior is vastly different than the way I think most people that don't work with behavior talk about behavior, if they even use the term. So these are all things. This is part of why all of this is to say, my short story of this is to say, there's no definitive answers here. There's not, right? We are trying to figure this all out, and most of us are moving around very blindly in the dark when we're trying to figure these things out. So the point is, my bottom line is different than your bottom line, right? I know for you all, the bottom line usually is dependent on clientele, whether you're getting those clientele. So at some point that's monetary, right? And then effectiveness, right? So, and we could talk about how those result in some quantitative data, right? Yelp reviews, for instance, or things like that. That's quantitative data. So, but my bottom line has, in some sense, effectiveness. Even what I'm calling effectiveness is, can I publish this data? So it's very different. Even as an applied scientist, my my bottom line is different. But the first part, I know a hurdle for you all is just going to be, how can you even talk to the client where you're getting information that's useful? And like what Lori mentioned about determining some level of baseline, and you're trying to do that at some qualitative level in some way, right? So can we make it quantitative in some way? And is that useful? If it's not useful, then why would you bother? Right? So part of my job is to try to find ways to get you all to find that useful. And I don't do a very great job at it in many cases, but I'm adjusting what I do. So that it's a little different, I think. Kiki, going back to what you were asking, because I'm kind of dodging I feel a little bit like a fly should land on my head the way I just kind of dodged that question. But applied behavior analysis has very different ways, I think, of trying to assess things. And even where applied behavior analysis, the bread and butter of applied behavior analysis is within autism therapy. And where they have been very effective at being able to positively change behavior. We're not going to get into an ethics discussion here, I should say, or we can, but not right now, right? Not at this moment, not with what I'm saying. So, but where
you're the host.
Yeah, I'm just saying, I'm happy to talk about what applied behavior analysis even is, or the ethics involved, or things like that. But I'm bad with tangents, so I was trying to not derail myself, and I just derailed myself in the process of not trying to derail myself. So that's how bad with tangents I am. But applied behavior analysis does a lot of things. Everything is focused on quantitative data. So how do we get some data in some way? And in many cases, how do we experimentally manipulate that? And that's some of what I've tried to bring from that field, I think, more into animal training, but in a way that's not avert. So I've tried to figure out ways that I can get trainers to use simple quantitative based like preference assessments, where they get some data and then they see the joy of it. It's a little like trying to teach kids how to like math, in a certain sense, in that, there are a lot of kids that don't like math, but I'm nerdy enough to think math is fun. So you can do things, right? You can do things that make it more enjoyable and make it not aversive. That's really the key here. So ways that people can use that. And I'm really fascinated about the way that you all were talking about this, just in general, because it's all, part of the question is just that utility. If it's not immediately useful to you, why would you do it? So how do we make it useful?
I think we were talking about some of the challenges of trying to get data, and I think they're especially relevant right now because many of us are working online and we are not even there for 1 hour a week to take data. So I've been really working on making it easy, trying to make it easy for my clients to get video to me. Trying to be really specific about what I want video of. I think video is the best way to get data from clients, is to have them video their training sessions. And then if I want to count, I can. It's not going to be, you know, a complete measure of, you know, how often has the dog done this behavior over the past week since I saw them last, but it will give me some idea how behavior is changing. So, so I set up, with the pandemic and stuff, I set up a Google Drive where, and every client just has a folder where I share video of their session with them, and then they can post video. And even then, it's still sometimes I don't get, I don't get what I ask for, but I mean, I'd be interested if anybody in the audience has had good luck with having clients to get them data in some way too. I mean, we have a bunch of experienced behavior consultants in the audience too. So.
That was a perfect segue, Kiki, to attending to questions that people have mentioned. And I was just looking at that even beginning where Sarah Weber, I believe, mentioned something initially about using forms as prompts to some degree. So not necessarily adhering strictly to the form, but using it as a way. Oh, and I just saw Sarah asking me a question, a specific example of what, Sarah? Data to collect. So one of the simplest tools that I first introduced people to, and I'll give my quick, like the elevator pitch of the elevator pitch of this, is preference assessments. So I even talk about, do you even know what reinforcers work most effectively? Because there's debate about that issue. And it turns out we're not all that great at assessing even potential rewards or enrichment. So I have some stuff published on that. So one of the simplest ways that you can get both yourself and your client to work on some type of quantitative measure is to do a very simple paired choice preference assessment. I know this is going to come as a surprise to many people, but I happen to have a couple penguins on my desk, and by that I mean so we can.
I raise you one goat.
Oh, I also, I mean, look, everybody's bringing it out there. I have a polar bear. So we can do something like present a couple different items, and people can pick between these two items. So you can say, okay, do you want this is probably supposed to be an emperor penguin. It looks more like a king penguin to me, and this is probably supposed to be a rock hopper. So let's just call them king and rock hopper. So I present this left, right. You make a choice, only one choice. You pick between them. Let's say you pick king. And then I present, you know, again, another couple choices. You make a choice again, you pick king again. I do this for all possible choices for the number of items that I present. And then I get I actually get a percentage breakdown or a total count breakdown of how many times you've picked this item more than the other. And this can be used on the fly. You can do it in, you know, a minute, 2 minutes when you get good at it. By the way, I've run into a lot of problems, in particular with dogs, and because of histories of, you know, being delivered this from one hand or right. So things like that. Did you just present a penguin, Nancy?
No, Benny did.
Oh, of course Benny has a penguin. So that just made me like Benny even that much more. I've never met Benny, but I love Benny in all those pictures. So looks like some type of Sphenicadae. That's maybe a Humboldt penguin. God, I didn't mean to nerd out that much on penguins, but so you get a breakdown, and you can use that pre-training session. You can use that, and it gets some buy-in, I think, for both you with getting experience with quantitative data, and also with your client starting to see some of the value of data. So is Kiki grabbing a? Are we gonna just make this into a like? How many penguins does everybody have in their?
I don't have a penguin. I have goats.
Benny is about to sing with his penguin.
Sorry, somebody was scooting her butt across the carpet.
Oh,
Might need to go outside.
okay. So that's one idea, and then I've talked about some other ideas as well, but that's a simple way to use quantitative data in some way that can be beneficial. But I'm always these discussions are what I'm besides being absolutely fascinated about getting to talk with you all and getting to talk with people like Nancy and Lori and Kiki about this. It's also figuring out where are some ways that data might be a little, and quantitative data might be a little more useful in some way. And again, with the caveat that it might not be.
I really enjoyed a podcast recently with an ATA podcast with Sonia Bevan. Did anybody listen to that? Where she talked about working with clients and like say it's the issue is a dog barking. And so getting an idea of, how long that barking episode occurs each time. And then when she talks to the client later, at some point she checks in and they say, well, the dog is still barking. And she's like, how long is the dog barking? And it turns out that the dog's gone from a 3-minute bark fest to a 10-second bark. And that's a huge change. And so that, sometimes the data isn't exact, but when you can get them to pay attention to how long the barking or whatever it is, the barking and lunging at another dog, whatever that is, if you can get them to pay attention to that initially, then, you might have to help them see the improvement that it went from, so many minutes of nonstop to, 10 seconds or whatever. And so if you don't have any data initially, if you don't have that baseline, you're not going to be able to point out that, how much better it is. And I think that's super important as well, that maybe what they want is the off switch, and maybe we can get the off switch, but it's a huge thing to celebrate going from 3 minutes of nonstop barking to 10 seconds. So,
yeah.
And when you have that baseline and you do show them how to take note of measurable progress, sometimes they don't even need to go all the way to the end. Sometimes they reach a point, that they're quite happy with the progress that they've made, and they don't even need to continue to the off switch.
Absolutely. Sometimes. Let's go on to my next thing.
Yeah, the baseline is with talking about barking. Barking is one of the things that I like to work on. Everybody has their things that they kind of like and don't like, and I like sort of extreme barking cases. Don't send them all to me at once, but
what does quiet look like?
I'll talk about that in a minute, but that video you're thinking of, I think.
I am.
The baseline is also really valuable in setting up what your criteria are going to be for that. Like I got sloppy recently on a case, and I said, okay, it was sort of like a combination thing I was doing, but part of it was basically a DRO, or differential reinforcement, of X amount of time without barking, as part of a combination treatment. And I set it at 30 seconds, and it was an estimate. And you know what? It was too long. And so then I actually measured and was like, oh, we need to start with 20 seconds so this dog can be successful. So that's a place where quantitative data is important. So I could have set that dog up for less frustration.
I was just looking at some of the questions as well, to jump in a little bit. So because both Maria and Trisha were talking about using some basic forms as well, and using them at prompts, as Trisha mentioned, at some level. So it sounds like everybody is using, or many people are using forms. let's not say everybody, let's say many people are using forms at some level. You see how I edited myself both internally and externally, right there? That's something I do. So, yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of use of forms at some level, which of course is providing some level of data, right? But then the question is, what are you asking and how do you ask that? And as Kiki, as you were talking about too, it's not just something that you give people and they respond to, because there's follow-up questions, much like you see in journalism, like as you were mentioning. You change, context matters, right? So I'm, yeah, again, and I'm more interested in listening than I am in having anything to say on this matter, because I have less to say on this matter.
Can I jump in and say I love what Tricia says about, and this was always my feeling as well, that she felt like a form, and Nancy, I know you're not doing this, but Tricia feels like the form gives the client time to think about their response. It actually prompts them to really consider how they would answer, and maybe it doesn't for everyone. For the people, maybe the 3-word answer, I'll just say anything and then I'll wait till we can talk. But for some clients, I think, yeah, whatever. Can we just get to the consult? But I agree with Trish, for Tricia, sorry. For some people, that's important to give them the time to think through that. So, it does depend. Now, I personally am not doing any privates right now. I'm teaching classes, but so maybe I shouldn't even be allowed to speak, but I have done a lot in the past.
Cut her off. Yeah. But hey, I have an anecdote about intake forms though. In the early days, when and that's another reason I think that forms, I tend to trip myself up sometimes, because you need to be so accurate about how you word the question in order to get the information that you're trying to draw out. In the early days, it was an aggression case, and one of the questions was, has the dog ever bitten another dog? This was my teeny tiny intake, with very specific questions before I went to the house. It was like a safety intake, so that I know what to expect and how to tell them to handle the dog before I get there. Has the dog bitten another dog? No. Has the dog bitten another human? No. So in my mind, there's no bite history. And so I set up our meeting according to that. There was some aggressive behaviors, but there was no bite history. Well, as the conversation continued, and I can't remember exactly how this was brought up, but as the conversation continued, she kind of circled back to that, and she said something. She mentioned a goat, and I said, "What goat?" She said, "Well, the goat that he killed." And I thought, oh, okay, that's important information.
Have that on my form.
So my form then changed to, has the dog bitten another animal? It was just, to me, it was, has the dog bitten another dog? Has the dog bitten a person? So I had to reword that. And I never would have gotten that information had she not offered it when we were talking about something else, because she kind of circled back to the goat that, I knew nothing about. So how you word your questions is obviously super important, but it's almost like playing chess, anticipating how they might answer something, how they might interpret a question. To me, it just became too much work. That's why I don't ask. I'll talk to them, and based on what they say, what you're saying, Kiki, with that feedback, based on the answer that they give me, that I'll direct the conversation that way based on the answers that they give me. And I'll ask about goats.
Yep. By the way, I'll just throw this in there, Nancy. There are in multiple disciplines, or within psychology, there's a long history of assessment, refinement, assessment, measurement. So how do you even ask questions? Because the answers you get very much are dependent to the questions. It's also been of interest for economists, political scientists, abroad, and then you know, even at Adelaide. So there are a number of a bunch of the research projects that the vet students are doing, the other faculty are doing, involve using surveys in some way to assess clients, to assess pet owners, to assess other veterinarians, other professionals, and how are you establishing those metrics? And it's so this is all to say there is 100+ years of research on the topic of how do you even ask questions and what kind of questions do you ask. And this is beyond my field. I use some and I've used some surveys in research, particularly with things like visitor responses, but it's out of my field, outside of using them for a simple metric. um, I but there's a lot, and it's very important how you ask questions. um, that is a good segue into another question that I was going to ask, which is, do you think even using forms or asking questions in some form, even if it's just a prompt questions, does that change the way that people talk about behavior? So clients talk about behavior? Do you think that, because some of this I think is the purpose is to get people to start reporting behavior in a way that and also treating responses in a way that, you know, is measurable, is observable, is something that you can intervene then on, rather than just saying my
Yeah.
dog's angry all the time, you know, right? He's just
Yeah,
angry.
I think it does. I think it definitely does. I mean, we kind of touched on it before, like asking, I mean, the ultimate question is, what does it look like, right?
Yeah.
What does that look
Can you
like?
explain
What
what
does that
that
look
looks
like?
like? And then
Yeah.
you start, you know, before you kind of agree on the use of that label, you need to both agree on what that means, right? What does it look like? I want to go back to something Kiki said, because I feel so strongly about video. Even when I was seeing privates, I took video. And of course, now in my classes, I use a lot of video. It's just so important because that, even though that's a different style of data collection, when people have their earlier videos to look at and their later videos to look at, they can see just a humongous difference. And that is so valuable. So even though that may not be the kind of data that you don't mean most of the time, I find that some of the most important data we can use as behavior consultants and dog and trainers.
And
Yeah.
you can take other kinds of data from video if you want to.
Absolutely.
As
You
well,
can
so.
count how long they did X, or yeah.
Yeah, at your own slow pace.
That's right.
You can slow it down, watch it again.
Well, that's my favorite, you know, 0.25, 0.5, 0.75 speed. So every once in a while I have to go to, you know, 2 times the speed, but usually it's the other way.
You get a lot of information about the environment too, that that is important, because you get to watch them work, but you get to see the environment. I really like to ask them to get a much wider view than necessary. I want to see what's going on. Is there a cat parading up and down in front of the dog, or you know, is the TV blaring and the washing machine going, and you know, all kinds of other things going on that the dog is having difficulty focusing on.
It's huge because that's the environment. And so when we get video of what's really going on, and maybe they're, you know, expecting so much from this dog in this chaotic environment in a little bitty space, you know, and it gives us just loads of information and loads of data points.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, really, it's, again, more, this is amplified sort of by the pandemic, because like I used to, in the last few years, I had started to do a lot of day training where I was training the dog, but I don't train any dogs now. I train people, and I need to see their behavior.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Do you
Here's
find
the-
that you're getting more of an authentic snapshot through videos than compared to, say, when we used to go to the client's house? Sometimes they would clean up before we get there, or and I find that I'm getting a more authentic look through video of the dog's environment.
I'll answer after Kiki, but I do want to answer.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Oh, so I never went to clients' houses, just so you know. I'm just a lazy person. They always
Oh, yeah.
came
You
to
have that
me.
great setup at
You
your place
seem
too.
really lazy.
But I can't even tell you how many times, I mean, rightly so. We know how to do that. We do that. We do platform work, say, just as an example of something. And I'm like, great, will you send me a 1-minute video? And what I see is this is just an example, but I see a chaotic setup and a chaotic ABC around the dog on the platform, and the dog's on the platforms sloppily. So I can really break that down and help that person one tag point at a time, turn that thing that they already think they know so well into something much more elegant. And I can't do that without video. Well, I can do it in person, but it's a lot better on video because I can see, how they're approaching it and what else is happening in the environment. And I mean, there's so many factors, where their bait bag is, how, what
You
cue
can give
they're
them
giving.
precise points too, like at 23 seconds.
Yes.
Have a look there. And
Yeah.
I really love
course.
working with video. Yeah.
So do I.
find that back to, the topic of the conversation with data collection, I find video really, really relevant.
And you guys have been doing, I think, probably that for longer than I have, because I mean, I always took video during my private sessions, but in terms of getting video from people who you're teaching, like through Fenzi, you guys both teach through Fenzi, right? So
Right.
We do, but I was relying on video long before Fenzi. And for example, when I was teaching loose leash walking to individual clients, I would follow them down the street with my phone. And then I would stop and I'd show them the video, give them a tag point, and then follow them again. And they could see how they progressed in loose leash walking.
Nice.
Via video.
Yeah. So I think, the data in our work tends to be a lot less about experimental demonstration of cause and effect, which is, I think, almost always impossible with what we do, because we never just isolate one variable that we're using to try to, like my ice maker dog, we've definitely seen changes as we have worked through, and I only meet with them like every 2 or 3 weeks. So it probably seems like it's taking longer than it actually is. But what was I going to say?
The stuff is uploaded and then shared.
Oh, but she also, they're also working with a veterinary behaviorist, and the dog started busaprone just before we started working on this. I mean, there's lots of, I can't attribute experimentally, empirically, I can't attribute all of the change in behavior to what I did, and we're working on other things at the same time. So,
well, that's another brilliant point, because, how many dogs have we worked with that started beds, that got started on meds right at the beginning of working with a fear case, say, or a highly, reactive, we might label highly reactive dog, and what's working, the meds or the behavior mod, and the fact is they're working together. So I truly believe that.
Maybe,
yeah. But I'm off when it's working well, they're usually working together. We think.
We assume,
we assume. Hard, we can't cut them open and find out. But
that's a common aspect of practice, though, of any applied endeavor, is that
package interventions.
Yeah, there's a shotgun approach, and like what Kiki was mentioning, there's little to no experimental manipulation. So saying what was responsible for what at what point, and there's a lot of nuanced detail in there, is often limited. I think this is part of where the field of applied behavior analysis has a lot of interesting lessons to be learned in that sense, because there are ways to bring in. Now, I won't get too much into this because this is there's stuff that you can do. I feel like it's a much further approximation. Right now, I'm more concerned about ways that, if it's useful, can there be quantitative data that can be collected? Worrying about, okay, now how do we start determining what factors were responsible for what, is that's a tag point I'd like to eventually get to, but not there right now. But there's some really cool stuff that's been done. I was gonna say, and this gets into a little, one of my loves is, of course, sci-fi, anything science fiction related, but there is stuff now, there's equipment now, and I've used some of it in the laboratory with some of my own past work, Noldis equipment, that can actually record from videos. So it's using video and it's digitally recording and identifying behavior quantitatively, so that you can tell what different animals are doing. You can tell levels of activity, and I really do think that's gonna, I mean, I love video as well for all things, and I think that's gonna be something of the future of, hey, we're, instead of having to worry so much about us being involved in some type of quantitative measurement, if we even want to go there, just being able to record all things all the time and seeing things like interactions and activity levels. The equipment's already available. So it's just a matter of making it available for practitioners, so that you all will be able to sit there and say, this is actually how much your dog was barking today versus this day. And these are the events that happened before, during, and after your dog barking. And let's try doing this. That's a really cool idea, I think, of where that will be in the future. But
Sounds great.
yeah, yeah, it'll be a neat place to get to. And I think it's a cool, lofty goal. It's how technology is eventually going to help, even dog consultants, dog trainers, dog owners at every level. So,
Hey, that brings up one of the
Sa-
tangents we promised.
oh, what's
Oh
that?
yeah, let me, before we
Well,
go to, can you hang on to
yeah.
the tangent for 1 second?
Okay,
I just
I'm gonna
want
have
to
to write it down.
respond to, okay. What Sarah brought up here is a good point, that some measures would only work in combination with others. That is, interaction effects between interventions is another part
Yeah,
of
I was
that
reading that, yeah.
complexity. That's a good point. So sorry,
Mhm.
Nancy. Did
No,
you
that's
write it
fine.
down?
That's
Okay.
glad you
That's
brought that up. Yeah.
that's the Gestaltian effect. So, and it's important, right? So, for those, I won't even, I'm just going to say it's Gestalt. There's an entire branch of psychology that deals with that. And it's important. So if you hear that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, that's in relation to Gestalt and some of the positions applied that way. So yes, interactions, and there's ways to test for those things as well, to look at interaction effects and how much that's responsible versus just any single factor. So there's applied sciences deal with some of this at some level.
A massive topic, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean,
Oh no, it's fascinating. Yeah.
you could get you could do a dissertation, you could make a career out of just that one question, that one area. So
Yeah.
Sarah, are you a scientist?
what's that? Oh,
I don't know. I was asking Sarah if she was a scientist.
Oh,
Anyway.
I will say my husband's a philosopher, and I do know that you can make a PhD out of, I mean, you can make a dissertation out of almost any little thing.
Yeah.
But to circle back to what you were talking about before, Eddie, is that I was thinking, when we talk about continuing education for trainers and behavior consultants, we focus, of course, on behavior, and there's a little bit more now available in terms of improving our skills and techniques with regards to client communication. But technology is somewhere is a field that we should also be focusing on, because the use
Yeah.
of technology in our work is obviously relevant and going somewhere, and something that that we can use to improve our effectiveness. So I think that there's not a whole lot out there, especially not geared. There's nothing, I don't think, that I know of geared towards dog trainers and behavior consultants that is technology focused for continuing education.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm a huge behavior analysis itself is often, you know, Skinner and others would describe themselves as behavioral engineers. With that's how they described applied practice. In fact, the field of behavioral enrichment was what Hal Markowitz originally described as behavioral engineering for zoo animals. And it was his editor that changed the name from behavioral engineering to behavioral enrichment. So for his second book.
Thank God for editors, huh?
Right, right. Thank an editor for the term enrichment. So that was 1981. So we're talking about almost 40 years ago. And you know, and that's spread obviously to the pet world. But technology is huge. And you know, I've consulted with, I've done a little bit of interaction with Wes Anderson of the Pet Tutor. Because we've been trying for years to set up a research project. Some of the stuff that I had proposed for a potential barking reduction program, and we were just about to get it going in San Diego when the pandemic took full swing. So we'll get back to there eventually, but because you know, I was involved in developing the treat and train, now the manners minder, and then when the pet tutor came around, Wes and I just immediately became really good friends because the pet tutor is amazing. Like anytime anybody talks to me about the treat and train, where you know, I mean, I helped develop that with Sophia was the lead author. I was the second author on our paper and on working with that with Sharper Image. Sophia Yin, who I consulted with for years. And the treat and train is highly inferior to the pet tutor. The pet tutor is amazing. And Wes is an engineer. And we need more engineers. We need more technology people like that in our field. Because they, you know, that, by the way, if you didn't know, the pet tutor is virtually indestructible. That thing is, you can toss that thing across a highway and let it get run over a few times. And well, don't take my word for that. That's a test. But it's pretty amazing as a device. So I always recommend, and eventually I will get some research done with it. But those kind of tools are amazing. And it's in the zoo world, they don't use enough of it. There's been a large fear of technology in many cases because it breaks down and then you have something really expensive in an exhibit that doesn't do anything. But with pets as well, I feel like for dog owners, dog trainers, I think there's a lot more appreciation of technology. So yeah.
Yeah, I've been able to get quite a few clients to get a pet tutor, but that again is, you know, that, I mean, I love the pet tutor. I love Wes, and I've been in on this as well since the very beginning. And, but not everyone can spend 400 on a,
Right.
on a remote feeder. And so
then
that,
you get a manners minder.
Especially not in Canada.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the price is a bit of a hindrance for pet tutors for sure. Which is, and you know, the treat and train again, like, I mean, I make, by the way, I don't get any money from any of these things, so that's worth throwing out there. But even from the thing that I helped develop. But the treat and train is a great device. I mean, I was involved at every step with that. and it's affordable. It's easy to get cheap versions of that as well. So that's certainly a very valid point. But yeah, the more that we can get devices using technology in a way to even record aspects of behavior, like when they occur or don't occur. So measuring barking at some level, and then eventually stuff like what Noldis already has been doing for 2+ decades in the lab, which is having video above I'm calling them exhibits, above enclosures for rats, for pigeons, in the Skinner boxes where they're being recorded right there, and you're measuring the behavior, and it's turning that into digital data, into quantitative data. That kind of stuff, I really want to see a future for that, for applied purposes.
Mhm.
Sarah has a comment here about what you're saying.
I'm just looking at that.
For audio as well as video, yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of what I've been that's part of what Wes and I have been trying to get going. I think we're going to start talking here hopefully soon. I don't know. We'll see how the winter goes for pandemic stuff. But maybe we'll get to start collecting data. But we were talking about using audio recording at every level. Oh,
The down thumb was
I'm
about
pretty
winter.
sure I'm pretty sure it's not going to go well.
I
right.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, let's not. Hey, I'm still trying to get over to South Australia. So we're trying to get me there. So I'm trying to be optimistic, because I have I have a class that I've developed in applied behavior analysis with animals. One of the first, if not the first, academic course. It's part of a core curriculum that is on this topic that we're I'll be teaching in March to vet students, to animal behavior undergraduate and graduate students. So we need to get me there, because that's it's important for me particularly.
Oh, it's so fantastic you'll be doing that. And for selfish reasons, of course, now I'm pleased you'll be there before me, before
Right.
I get to, because I would have missed
And
you by
me.
about a month. That's right. Yeah.
Yep.
I'm after Nancy.
Maybe not
Nancy's gotta
anymore.
get there first.
Well, when you
Uh-huh.
both eventually get there in the not so distant future, then I will be established. You'll get to come out to the Adelaide Zoo. You'll get to see some of the stuff that students that are working with me are doing, and I'll get to take you around to South Australia. You can, there's a lot of apparently there's a lot of great wine. I'm not a drinker, but there's apparently a lot of great wine in South Australia and outside of Adelaide as well. So you'll enjoy it.
Yeah, that'll be fun. That'll be so much fun.
And I know, and I mean, I was in Melbourne in December. God, doesn't that seem like forever ago? I feel like I'm talking back in my day when I was in Melbourne in the end of 2019. But yeah. So did we complete the tangent, Nancy? Was that?
Oh, probably. I've got 6 more tangents up my sleeve, so you have to reel me in if you let me get off on tangents. I don't even remember what else we were supposed to talk about. Loose leash
I
walking.
don't know, but we have these lovely people here. So if they
Yeah, what do you guys
have
want
a
to talk about?
topic,
I know I'm seeing a lot of I'm glad Kiki's been really good about attending to some of the chat as well, and I've been trying to pay attention as much myself. So questions? People are ferociously typing on their, trying to get out their questions now. I mean, I know, yeah, Nancy, you just mentioned loose leash walking, which was one of the topics that we had, and Kiki already mentioned that before about loose leash walking a little bit.
we could talk about that because that's a good topic. There's so many aspects to it.
Yeah.
And I know that, Kiki wrote that fantastic blog post. When was that? Was that this year? Was that, I don't even
Yeah, when was that?
I don't
Seems
know.
like eons ago.
Was it
Yeah.
during
I
the
think it was like
pandemic?
December. I think it was like December or November or something like that.
But
10 years ago.
and I don't know if you can put a link up in the chat to that article, if it's easy to locate and put a link to that, because everybody
Sure.
needs to read that.
Yeah,
And it
please do.
Do
resonated.
that.
It really resonated with me. You and I are on the same page regarding walking. I won't even call it loose leash walking because I don't really teach loose leash walking. I just, well, I certainly don't spend a whole lot of time teaching clients how to get their dog to walk next to them. That is something that I might kind of throw in there and say, here's something that you can teach them to do temporarily for a few steps. But generally, the big picture that I go for is, where it's legal and where you can and where it's safe, a long line on a harness, and a whole lot of zigzagging and sniffing. And I think just that, if we can teach them how to do that, walking harmoniously, that alone can address all kinds of other behavior issues that come up. The dog just needs to do that at least once a day.
Yeah. Well, I really like you have kind of a concept, like an overarching concept of like the good enough dog, like the
Mhm.
dog that does things that make the dog nice to live with for you personally. That's how I
Yeah.
interpret that
Yeah.
concept from you. But yeah, so like loose, walk, maybe we should call it like, instead of loose leash walking, we should just call it like walking with your dog or something.
Or
Something like
cooperative,
that.
you're both at
Yeah.
each end of whatever you're using. So,
Yeah.
just cooperating as partnership, as a dance. Like, what do you call that? I
Walking with the
mean,
dog.
walking
I
with the
call it
dog.
harmonious walks, but I
Yeah.
think I've heard that before too. And I don't think I'm the first one to call it harmonious walks, but you're right. Just Kiki, just walking with the dog is what it boils down to, doesn't it?
Yeah. Although, I mean, I still find myself like the other day still, having people who do want to learn, like, well, sometimes I need to walk my dog on a 6-foot leash and I need them to not pull me on a 6-foot leash, or,
Yeah.
and I do still teach pieces of that are about what I refer to as close walking, or,
Yeah.
attentive walking or something like that. But the thing that really hit me with that blog post was just that loose leash walking. Like, I think for a long time, I just thought of it as teaching literally walking. And it's not a homogeneous skill. It's a suite of skills. And the more of them that you can think of, the more you can break it down and teach each of those skills individually, so that then they come together, on the walk. And thinking about walking in more behavioral terms has been really helpful too. Like, I mean, how many times have I turned getting a treat into a cue to surge ahead?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
walk, treat, out.
To the end of
And
the
if you
leash.
think about it in terms of like the constant cycle of like antecedent behavior, and then a consequence that's the antecedent for the next behavior, then you start to realize like what it is that you're teaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just like, I think I finally did with that in the last year or so, is just kind of aligned how I think about walking with how I was thinking about other stuff, which I'm a lazy person, or
Apparently we
same
all
way that
are.
Lori is lazy, but like, I like to do as much upfront. Like, I like to design the environment so I have to do as little training as possible. And so that's where, just give the dog a longer
Totally.
leash, and then you've eliminated 50% of your conflicts over pulling,
Yeah,
otherwise
you
it took me
can't
so
always
long
do
to
that,
figure
of
that
course.
out.
That's where a lot of
No,
our clients are
right.
coming from. They're lazy
Yep.
trainers, and I mean, it's a bad use of the term, but I mean that they don't. Many of them are like, oh, just make it stop, or just, they don't want to have to put in all the work. And not all of them are like that, but I think the majority of the people
Right.
that I work with, that's what I see. It's like, if I can make it easier for them, or even just telling them, he doesn't actually have to walk on your left-hand side.
I was just going to say that. I was just
Well,
going to say, we give them permission to loosen up,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah, well, it depends on where you carry your firearm, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Your sword arm is on.
And
Um,
Nancy has less of those problems being in
yeah.
Canada.
I don't have that.
Oh,
problem.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gun.
But yeah,
Yeah.
like, skills, sort of breaking it down to the level of like, okay, what should the dog do after they go check something out? Like, what should finishing sniffing be a cue to do? And if it's to check back in with you, then they can't do that and surge ahead at the same time.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just stuff like that.
And
would you say
equipment
then that-
matters. Sorry.
Yeah, I have had some really extreme, not a lot, but some really extreme cases of equipment as cue. Like, I had these two dogs that were, they lived in an apartment, and when they walked out the front door of their apartment to go down the stairs to go for a walk, there was another apartment right across the landing, and there was a dog behind that door, and these dogs would come out on the equipment that they had used with their former trainer, which were prong collars, and they would just come out and be like, "Rah, rah, 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 rah," like before anything even happened at the other door. And like, I don't usually insist that people switch equipment immediately, but when this owner got her dogs, got comfortable putting on the harness, and got comfortable doing leash handling stuff that we talked about first, and we walked out of the apartment for the first time on the harnesses, they just like walked out the door and
that cue was gone.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I don't know if it was just the equipment, it might have been how it was handled as well, but it was like the most extreme case of that I had ever seen. So
Yeah, I used to walk my clients a lot. So we'd both get on the leash, however long it was. And I mean, if basically one of you turns off and goes, there's a disconnect, right? You're no longer walking together unless you're running really fast after the other one. So I think it's helpful for your general person who's trying to learn how to walk on a leash to know what it feels like to be at the other end. And so how, helping clients understand how they can turn and ask their dog to come with them, how they can change directions, or, I'm in an urban environment. So, it's not always the case that they can always use a long line. They might be able to.
That's true.
If they go to the park first. So, having the skills for various lengths of leashes is important, and what the leash material is made of, because I want their hands to be as loose and comfortable as possible. I don't want them gripping nylon that slips and hurts their hand. And so, I just find that there's so many factors. There's the way we face, there's the cues we give, there's the equipment the dog's wearing and how it fits on their body, and there's the leash we're holding, and there's, there is so much to that supposedly simple behavior. And then there's all those notions, those preconceived ideas that the dog has to be right next to you and looking up at you for guidance the whole way. And can you imagine an hour and a half of having to look up and over and figure out, what are we doing now? What are we doing now? Can I step forward now? Like Cassie's often, at over 15 right now, she's a little behind me, but most of her life she's been in front. I don't care as long as she's not dragging me down the street.
oh my God, I prefer it. I prefer them to be in front, because I'm having this same thing right now, because Pigeon is 16 and she's like back there, and it hurts my neck to like have to keep like looking back and making sure that she's not trying to sniff and stuff. I prefer them to be like just slightly in front of me, so I can see their whole body. I want to see if her tail starts to go up. I want to see if one of her ears goes forward, because that means there's a dog 2 houses up or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, being
Yeah.
able to see that language is super important. And if your dog is right next to you or slightly behind, it's so much more difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do, I think I might have given the impression earlier that I spend little to no time teaching walking right next to you. I do teach it, especially when it pertains to getting from point A to B, and that's usually how I describe it. This is when you use these skills under these circumstances, when you're trying to get from your car to a building, when you're trying to
Mhm.
cross the street, when you're going through a crowd, or when you know
Mhm.
that there are moments that is a really useful skill. And I like to teach the check-in behavior. That's the foundation of walking on leash is that communication, to have the
Mhm.
dog checking in with us often, um, and sniffing, to really encourage sniffing. And if the dog's head is up, obviously they can't sniff. And um, I compare that to going for a scenic drive and having a blindfold on. When you're going for a scenic drive and you're blindfolded, what's the point? And so I don't see the point of walking with the dog and not allowing the dog to sniff.
Right.
Yeah. I always like I love Kay Lawrence's metaphor of taking your dog shopping. And then you
Yeah.
they want to go. I don't think she didn't use this example. This is like my suburban Ohio upbringing leaking into her English countryside metaphor. But you take your kid to the mall or whatever, and they want to go in Spencer's and look at the fart cushions or whatever. And so you stand on the outside, you
The
stand
what?
just outside, like the whoopee cushion or
Oh,
whatever, or the fake dog poop or whatever. And then so that you let them go in and look at it, and you hang out right outside the store and you wait for them to come out, and then you walk along together.
yeah.
So
Yeah.
Are there even Spencers anymore? Is that a thing? I know.
are there
I
are there even malls anymore?
Right. I was gonna say,
I don't think so.
I was thinking
Yeah.
of Marks and Spencer's, but that's in England. So
Yeah.
I don't
Oh,
know
that's
what's
fancy. No, I was thinking about like the
Marks
store
and
where you
Spencer's.
went to buy
10 years ago. when it
stoner
was-
toys in high school.
Yeah. 10 years ago when it was 2019 and there used to be malls. So
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there were people.
Yeah, there were I was about to say I've had so little human I just went to a friend's the other to my friend Peter and Carrie. Carrie was in town, so of Reptelligence, and so we were all got to hang out. So Dana, Peter, for any of the people that know the parrot people, taking wing is Peter's consultation, and Reptelligence, all the stuff that Peter and Carrie do with that, and then Dana is one of the TAs for LLA for Susan Friedman, and so we all got to hang out, and I made a fantastic, my definition, fantastic. I made my first vegan dinner, which was tacos and nachos. But first human contact outside of my immediate living space that I've had in 6+ months. That was so. It was insane. I was like, is this what it's like to I really honestly felt a little off kilter.
It's really difficult
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, I wasn't
Yeah.
making enough eye contact, stuff like that, like I was like, is this what you do when you interact with people? It just anyway. I was going to mention my my master's thesis from North Texas, which we published this past year. Jesus Rosales Ruiz and I published it. One of the studies from that this past year was with halter training La Mancha goats, and so it was in effect loose leash walking and healing, what I called healing, but it was really loose leash walking with La Mancha goats. And what you said, Kiki, really resonated with me, because that was the point of what we did. The whole reason we halter trained and then leash walked the goats was to get rid of all this other bad stuff that they were doing, jumping on and all this stuff that the zoo didn't want to have happen. And so I said, okay, what do you want to have happen? What do we want to focus on that we're going to increase as a result, that, instead of just focusing on let's get rid of behavior, let's increase something, and then that'll get rid of behavior. And it was, let's get them on a halter. These are, let's walk them. It increases their interactions. And it's incompatible with a lot of the jumping on and the head butting and all this crazy stuff that these bottle fed La Mancha petting zoo La Mancha goats would do. So it was a lot of fun. And it's a nice little published study on shaping, which there's not much of. So that's good.
I want to say something about harnesses, only in the sense that I've had several people come to me for help with leash walking and said, my dog can't wear a harness because they had put a harness on, either it hurt them or it was too tight, or they forced it on the dog, stuck it over the dog's head when the dog wasn't ready. And so I just wanted to put a little plug in for dressing, cooperative dressing with your dog. And that, even if a dog comes in that, even if a client comes in and says, my dog won't wear a harness, starting over with a new harness and starting from scratch and rebuilding up to the dog has the choice of putting their head in it, or, putting the collar around and snapping if it's a buckle harness. So I've just found that a theme that came up quite a few times, and that's why they were on a prong collar or a collar or whatever. And so getting them to recognize that we can start over just with another harness and another process can be extremely useful. There's so many aspects to leash walking, but that's one, letting them dress themselves and giving them the choice.
Yeah. I just actually just switched so the ice maker dog is going to get a balance harness, which you all may know that Lori, you invented it, right? That's yours.
I did.
Yes.
Yes.
Fine.
This week, but partially as a cue. This dog is also she's afraid of one crossing on their normal walk.
Uh-huh.
Like gets very worked up and worried and tries to escape. They kind of just but they jolly her through it, or they run, or they do all these things to kind of get her across. And then she actually seems to enjoy the park that's across this intersection.
Mm-hmm.
And she's on an easy walk, which is I don't love. But I don't want them to not be able to take her to that park. But I also want to be able to work on her fear of this intersection without. So I'm going to have them do all of that training on the balance harness and continue to use the easy walk for walks when they're going to, hustle her across the street.
Yeah.
So, which kind of gets us into our fear. Fear topic too.
Nice segue. Yeah.
Right.
Nice segue.
Best segue.
Professionally done. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember I used a different harness for nose work that, years ago when Pigeon did nose work classes, and one day I tried to walk her to class on her nose work kit, and she pulled me the whole way there.
Yeah,
because that's what you do when you're wearing these clothes.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So I'm hoping I can protect their ability to take her on this is a dog who really only can currently walk like one specific route anyway. And for her to be able to have that enjoyment, and for them to be able to have that enjoyment at the park without them sort of ruining what we're going to try to do.
Mm-hmm.
With
so you mean that when you say one specific route, there is literally only one way to get to the park?
No, she just doesn't want to go any other. She doesn't want to walk any other direction at this time.
So that's a good point you brought up, that just changing one aspect, one element of the environment, like equipment or location, or just one element to start addressing a fear when you need that element, but you just need to change it up somehow, but you still need it. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly.
Yeah,
Thought that
I've
was
gotten a lot more particular about when to change equipment and stuff like that as a result of learning more about stimulus control. Like I have a client right now where we probably do really need to get her dog off of a prong collar, but I don't want, first of all, I don't want her out there without the thing that makes her feel safe, until we can give her some skills with give her some skills and give the dog some skills. But I also really want the harness to get attached to the new behaviors as a cue. So
You're saving
Yeah,
it for
and if
that,
you,
maybe.
sorry.
So I was just saying to Kiki, so you're kind of saving it for that until she's ready to use the new equipment. And
yeah, I don't want certain behaviors to have a reinforcement history with that
yeah,
on. I don't want, like I want her to have the skills so that when she goes out on the harness, she knows what to reinforce and how to handle the leash and what to do if he does react to something, so that his experience with the harness on is super consistent.
Yeah, if you change that equipment up too quickly, then you end up having two pieces of equipment that don't work.
Yeah, and you may end up pairing that equipment with other strong antecedents that, so it becomes a conditioned stimulus associated with all the behaviors that you don't want.
Yeah.
I'm losing my articulateness at the moment, but yeah.
Well, you're talking about some of the aspects, and this is where responded conditioning starts to come into play too, because now we're talking about potential blocking and overshadowing that can happen just based on the training tools you're using, which is where that history becomes really important. And I think that's often many times the way people think about behavior, not people that work with behavior, but I think people that don't work with behavior often think that it's something that it's like, oh, I can just get something and then I can get rid of it. And so it's like, if I create something, I can just subtract it. And it's just, it's just a race. And it's like, no, there is so much evidence on the effects of learning histories. And the respondent, the Pavlovian guys have done it the best, where they show how this is, it really can really have, it can block. That's why it's called blocking. It can actually block further learning. So even just the ability to learn. Now, there's ways from an applied purpose to get around that, but the point is, why would you want to introduce a hurdle so unnecessarily? So that history is really important, and we have to be very attentive to it.
You're kind of also talking about the history of dog training. I mean, this is what people want. They want the quick fix. Give me the harness that stops the dog from pulling. Give me the collar that stops the dog from going anywhere when it starts barking and lunging. Give me the, this or that, the quick fix for any number of behaviors. And so it's our job to help.
Yeah. If you've already seen my Facebook post now, you're probably sick of hearing me talk about the ice maker dog, but it was a really interesting, there was something interesting that I think I observed with her. So the short version is that we did counter conditioning, what in training terms you might call counter conditioning with a start button, where she did a behavior to initiate a pairing trial. So we taught her to go, to lay on a mat. And when she lays on the mat, then the person would take the cup, put it against the ice maker, and then deliver a treat. And initially, I just tried to do that without the mat behavior. And in the time that elapsed between this and then getting a treat and giving it to her, she would do part of her escape behavior, which was like to run, initially was to run down the
Yeah.
hall and press against the bathtub. What she ended up doing was, this goes against the ice maker. She would take a wide circle out into the hall and then come back in time for the treat in the bowl. And after a week of the clients practicing that, when I looked at the video, I thought, oh, it looks like we're training her to run down the hall part way and turn around. And her body language was a little different. And so then I introduced the mat, and the mat is a way for her to initiate the trial, but it's also incompatible with running down the hall. And so then we did, she lays on the mat, they do whatever intensity of ice maker behavior they're gonna do, and then they would deliver the treat to her bowl. So she would get up, so she was reset and could decide whether she wanted to lay down again. And interestingly, so the pairing really seemed to take, and the dog now, like if she hears the ice maker from another room, she'll run into the kitchen with her tail wagging. But if she's standing there and there's no mat, or at least this was 2 weeks ago or whatever, she was standing there and there was no mat and they did the ice maker, she would still do this turn. And if the mat was there, she often wouldn't even get up off the mat.
Right.
Her patterns.
And so I, how do you explain that? Do you explain it as, oh, the dog is more afraid when there's no mat there? I don't think so. Or is it, in the presence of the mat, there is no reinforcement history for the circle behavior, and there's reinforcement history for the stationary behavior. So it really makes me question, like, even some of, looking at the dog's behavior as a measure of what they're feeling. But so then what we've been doing over the past couple weeks is we faded the mat to a hand towel, and then the hand towel got folded in half. And so I'm trying to fade the cue for that stationary behavior to like the location where the mat usually is put down. So
I know Nancy's dying to talk, but
I'm not. I'm just.
No, I mean, I just think it's so interesting because I think the dog, potentially went back to we can't really know, but went back to the circle behavior because the mat wasn't there, and that's what the dog did before. So really, the dog just needs to know what to do, right? I mean, how do I either give the okay that you can start the ice maker, or you've started the ice maker, and what's going to happen next? Because there's that, if it is a stimulus, if it's a stimulus pairing, then like you said, there's that amount of time between the ice maker making noise and going to get the treat, unless you have a pet tutor right next to the dog. And maybe you can. Well,
we did actually, like, for a while we had a second person to deliver the treat so they could do it faster and try to cut that out. But yeah, I don't know if I'm just a crappy counter conditioner or what, but I've encountered that a number of times where it's like, okay, I'm going to try to, like, 1, 2, and I can't get it done before the dog barks or lunges or whatever. And I, typically you're told, like, okay, don't worry about that when you're counter conditioning. And I think, honestly, if I had just continued to do that, it's quite possible that circling behavior would have faded.
I'm curious if there was, when the mat wasn't there, was there a pause? Did the dog just kind of look for the mat before going down the hall and doing the circle, or was that an automatic?
I don't think so. I'd have to go back and look at the video to be sure what I think I saw, but I think she just kind of went like, as just the person approached the ice maker. And I had a similar experience with a dog that was worried about fire, where I couldn't get I was like touch the lighter and then drop a treat, and I couldn't get the treat down before the dog went like brr. So and then I just threw the mat down, and the mat's not incompatible with brr, but it there was enough of a like, oh, wait a minute.
So
that I was able to then like get the treat in there. And I know you're not, typically you're told you're not supposed to worry about operant behavior. You're supposed to, if the stimulus happened, then the other stimulus needs to happen. But you certainly can trap behaviors
as long
in
as
there.
they're as long as they're
Totally.
below threshold. So if they're barking, then they're
Right.
so it's not. I don't think that it's I think maybe sometimes that could be misinterpreted if somebody thinks it's okay if they react, if they freak out. If I know I'm using constructs here, but it's okay, give the food anyway. But it's kind of not, because we're too close to, or the intensity
Yeah.
is too.
And that's why I say maybe I'm just doing a crappy job of counter conditioning. Like I'm not working hard enough to find that threshold or whatever. But the ice maker dog was really interesting because with another stimulus that we've been working with, which is Apple notification tones, which she also would run away from. They did try, I wasn't there, so I don't know how it was executed, but they did try really lowering the intensity of that, like having her in a whole other room, putting cotton in her ears like they would for when she was going to get a bath and stuff like that. And and we made more progress with it, with letting, we had it at the lowest volume at first, but it was in the room and she got to turn it on. So that's pretty fun to watch.
I want to see video of Ice Maker Dog now. Who, speaking of histories, now forever, like you'll tell me this dog's name, and I'm just gonna be like, Ice Maker Dog. It's his name now in my brain forever. But there's some interesting stuff one of the things, and when we, like I mentioned respondent conditioning as well, but there's always the potential of elicitation effects. And when I talk to people about elicitation effects, they often think about, the conditioning history in terms of Pavlovian conditioning. I'm like, yeah, but half of Pavlovian conditioning is about the stuff that isn't unconditioned. So it's the stuff that gets elicited from the unconditional or unconditioned stimulus. So that's half of all of respondent conditioning, is the non-learning aspect. And all stimuli can have, without any conditioning history, and they have relevance at some level towards the biological aspects, evolutionary history of the organism itself. So there's a lot of interesting stuff that's been done with adjunctive behavior, misbehavior, even quote unquote superstition. And I'm happy to get you. I have a publication from earlier this year on some of the stuff we did with pigeons and chickens and doves back in the Timberlake lab. So Bill and I published this. Bill's last publication, sad, but Bill Timberlake, who was my doctoral mentor, amazing scientist, amazing human being, and he passed away just was at the very beginning of the year. So we have something on, response independent schedules and their effects. And I'm happy to share that article with you because some of it might resonate, some of it might not. But it's an interesting, I think you would like it anyway. I mean, we often talk about, I know Kiki, you and I will we'll get into these discussions about some of the more sciencey stuff. So I'm happy to share that with you. And then you have to share with me
Ice Maker Dog
video. It sounds like this is a blog in and of itself, Kiki. I don't know. Anyway,
it's more than a blog.
There's some cool stuff, and making it come full circle to what you had mentioned earlier as well about not having experimental control, and then being in an applied background. I mean, these are all relevant, so we can't. Anybody who says they have an answer to this, like why this is occurring, I think I'd be highly skeptical of that. Anybody, and scientists and practitioner alike. I rarely have answers, so I know that's for myself, for a variety of reasons. There's a shotgun approach to that in and of itself. Yeah, there's some interesting questions there, and some ways that could be tested.
Well, I just want to say, I think it's really cool what you did with Ice Maker Dog. So,
Ice Maker
Ice
Dog.
Ice Maker Dog came a long way. What's Ice Maker Dog's other name?
You don't need
The
to
other
know
name, yeah.
Her name is Scout.
A Scout.
She's
Scout?
adorable. There's a lot of stuff to love in the videos. The other they have a cat who likes to participate in all the training
I
sessions.
saw
Love
the
that.
cat in the video, yeah.
It's
Super
my
adorable.
favorite. Yeah.
And also a second dog, and the owners do a really great job of, like, you know, reinforcing the other animals for just hanging out, or as I call it, city supervising.
Yeah.
Right, like one guy's working, the other guys, 3 guys are standing around getting paid.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Eddie, did we have other stuff on the list that we promised to cover? I'm looking at the time.
I know. You know, I'm really pretty. I'm impressed that, and Nancy did a fantastic job of helping facilitating segues. Kiki got the best segue. And we managed to cover the 3 topics we could, and there weren't that many tangents. That's
Nope.
one of
I'm a little disappointed about that.
I know. I was gonna say that's one of the I mean, I often tell Nancy and that she's one of my favorite people on the planet, because she is. So one of my favorite, certainly in my favorites of favorites for trainers, favorite people, and part of it is because of the rewarding history I had of just being at Wolf, where Nancy and I we were referring to our table as the captain's table. And another part of that is because, like, there's Nancy and I can just go on tangents, and it's like the most fun derailed adventure in the process, where we just build off of each other's tangents. So and now I know, Lori, you're going to be coming to Australia too, eventually, which is going to be
That was the
amazing.
plan.
Well, both will get there. I'm looking for it. Kiki, you're going to have to come too. First, I have to get there, and then I'll get things set up for when you all visit. So you'll get to see.
I'm gonna try to emigrate to New Zealand. That's our plan.
Oh, you know what? We might have to work on this refugee story together. So let's start training those pelicans to fly us there. So yeah, no, this is fantastic though. This is really great. If there's any last few questions anyone might have, or anything, comments? Was there probably not enough penguin? Let's throw a penguin back up there.
Yeah, I think that, yeah. Penguin and polar bear stories.
Any goat questions?
Go.
I would like a goat. I think they're like, they might, if you have land, I feel like they're almost better pets than dogs. They're so cute.
I prefer goats over sheep. And I'm I don't want to, I hope there's no goats listening. I kind of like pigs more than I like goats. But goats are amazing. There's plenty of pigs that don't get full sized. So, you know, like the potbelly pigs still get big, but they don't get like farm pig big, right? So, and there's other pigs. They're great though. They're really social. They're really adorable. Goats are still amazing, and every one of them. I have a preference for La Mancha goats, but the Nubians and the pygmies, all of the breeds, they're great.
Peter and Dana have some nice goats, don't they?
Yes, they do. They're adorable. There's a lot of goats there. I was going to say one of their goats is like my friend. There's one parrot and one goat that are like my BFFs out at Peter's place.
Yeah, I love working with birds too. So
one of the Amazons, Bacardi, is my BFF. So a lot of the other parrots there do not like me. I don't know what's going on. I don't know what Peter tells them behind my back, but there's so this is fantastic. This is great.
Well, nice seeing everyone.
Yeah, it was great. So
Yeah,
thank
we had a nice little
you
group.
everybody for coming out. Do Lori, Nancy, Kiki, and I, you want to hang out for a second, and then I will put out the video out there. For it should be out there within the next, before the end of the week for anybody that wants to catch anything. But I'll post links everywhere as well. So thank you all for coming, and we'll have a YouTube video up there. And feel free to reach out to all of us. So thanks. Bye,
Bye, all.
everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.